Now, let me tell you a quick story, and we'll get to this text, just to show you how God is an amazing God and how you have to trust when God is positioning you. And you have to know how to determine that God is trying to move you to the next level. Sometimes God is trying to do something that we refuse to see. And sometimes you can block your blessing, not because the blessing's not there, but because you don't have enough faith to see it. I was on a flight coming from Dallas. In fact, I may have just preached at Mountainview. I'm not sure where I was, but somewhere here in Dallas I was preaching. And I went to the airport and I had on one of those clergy jackets I wear. It had a big cross in the middle of it, white and gold with a white cross. I can remember when I first started wearing those, the COC got really uncomfortable. Church of Christ was okay, but the COC got uncomfortable. But I've been, wearing those for a long time now. And so I was wearing it, went to the airport, and when I go to the airport with a clergy garment on, normally they give me a different kind of treatment because in their mind, this is a pastor. And I methodically, normally, they'll move me through the line, take me to the front of the line, move me through the check. And I got on the plane with my clergy garment on. And I sat in first class because I feel that's where I belong. Y'all gonna help me along in here. If you don't think high about yourself, ain't nobody else gonna think nothing about you. And a gentleman I sat next to looked at me and said, sir, you look like you're a pastor. And I said, yes, I am. Now don't play with me. All right. I said, yes, I am. I said, yes, I am. Praise Jesus. And because I am a preacher who does pastoring. And I was using it in its service generic form. There is a verb and a noun form to the pastorate. And I know the noun form describes the collective, but I was talking about the verb form, and the verb form that I pastor is also relative to what preachers do because we feed the church. All right, just making sure we're on the same page here. And so the gentleman I sat next to, Caucasian gentleman, said, sir, where are you from? And I said, I am from Atlanta. And he says, well, you look like you're a pastor. Where do you pastor? I said, well, to be more technical, I am a minister in Churches of Christ. And he said, you don't look like you're a minister in the Church of Christ because I'm looking at what you're wearing. He said, I too am part of the restoration movement. And I said, well, that's wonderful, man. I appreciate meeting you. And he said, well, that's interesting that we're meeting. I said, well, what do you do? He said, I'm part of an organization that funds churches that can't get loans with banks. It just so happened for 5 years, I have been trying to get a loan with Bank of America, and they would not give it to us. Because the laws changed and churches became bad investments. So I couldn't get no loan. This gentleman said, well, what we do is we help churches get loans that can't get them with banks. And we use an investment strategy whereby we have millions of dollars sitting in the bank for churches that can't get loans. I said, sir, it just so happens I'm in a building project and I would love to get a card. And he said, well, wonderful. He said, you sure can have a card and call us if you need anything. And he just happened to be sitting next to me in first class and gave me the card. And then I found out that he was connected to another organization that ended up being the funding behind the building we are now getting for $9.7 million. Now listen, here's the moral of that story. I was wearing a clergy garment that the COC don't like. But because I happen to be wearing it, I caught someone's attention. God used what I was wearing, what I decided to wear, as a means, as a providential means to connect me to the right person. And I just so happened to get a first class ticket that just so happened to be right next to somebody that had access to $9.7 million. What I'm saying to you is when God presents you with an opportunity, you have to learn how to recognize the providence of God and have enough faith to trust it in spite of what your struggle may be to get it. Are y'all following what I'm saying? In other words, faith in God is necessary because God can't bless faithless people. Now come to Hebrews 11. Come here. Y'all okay? I said God can't bless faithless people. Look at verse 29. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Look at verse 30. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. Look at me. The Hebrew letter is an interesting document because it is about the necessity of holding on to your faith. I won't bore you with the background of this letter, except to say that this letter accentuates the superiority of Jesus and the superiority of his covenant. In other words, God has given us a better covenant with better promises, and we have a better mediator who's better than Moses, who's better than Joshua, and has provided us with better blessings. So the Hebrew writer is accentuating the superiority of Jesus because he's writing to a group of people who are now deciding and are threatened with going back into Judaism. In other words, they have accepted Christ, they have accepted the new covenant, but because of the outside pressure from the Roman government, and because Christianity was being viewed as an illegal religion, they began to retreat back into Judaism. And the Hebrew writer is trying to encourage them that if you leave Jesus, there's no more sacrifice for sin. In other words, Christ is the once and for all sacrifice, and if you leave him, there's no one coming after him. Are y'all following me so far? Now watch this. There are 5 warning passages in the book of Hebrews. All of them are warnings about faith. One of the more popular ones is Hebrews 3 verse 12, where he says, take heed lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief. In other words, this letter is an encouragement to hold on to faith, because I told you God cannot bless faithless people. Now, he will take 10 chapters to encourage them to hold on to faith. And when he gets to chapter 10, he will end by saying that we are not of those who turn back. And then he starts chapter 11 with, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. In other words, I've told you to hold on to faith, and now let me provide you with a description of faith. Now, Hebrews 11:1 is not a definition of faith. It is a description of faith. That is, what does faith do? Faith is the substance, and the word means assurance of things hoped for and the evidence or the proof of the thing I can't see. Faith functions in a way that helps me to trust what I can't see, because I'm confident in God's promise. And if I trust God's promise, then I don't have to see it, and I can function as if I already have it. Are you following what I'm saying? Now when he goes through Hebrews 11, what he's going to do is he's going to say, or he's going to go from description of faith into the demonstration of faith. By faith, Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice. That's verse 4. Then by faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death. And then by the time you get to verse number 6, without faith, it is impossible to please him. He's going to pull out, watch it now carefully, examples or demonstrations of faith in every generation. Hold this in your mind. In every generation, he's going to pull an example of faith. Abel, he's going to pull that example of faith. Enoch, then he's going to go to Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac. He's going to pull examples of faith all the way into the Exodus. Now come to verse 29. In 29 he says, by faith the Israelites kept the Passover, and he references their exodus from Egyptian bondage. Then in verse 30 he goes to, by faith they overcame Jericho. Now stop. Between verse 29 and verse 30, something happened that's not easy to see with the naked eye. From verse 29 to verse 30, the Hebrew writer skips 40 years. That's all right. When they were in Egyptian bondage, the very next historical event is the wilderness wandering. But what the Hebrew writer did is the Hebrew writer said by faith they came out of Egypt and kept the Passover, and then he skips 40 years. So from verse 29 to verse 30, there's a 40-year gap in which the generation that came out of Egypt was not the generation that went into Canaan.
That's all right.
Now you've got to ask the question, why would God skip 40 years and not mention anything about the wilderness wandering? It is because for 40 years, God did not see faith in the corporate people of Israel. So when God was writing through the Hebrew writer, Hebrews chapter 11, when he got to the wilderness wandering, he had to skip over the wilderness wandering and go to a whole nother generation in order to pick up talking about faith. If God rewrote the book of Hebrews, and if he rewrote chapter 11, and he was going to replace it with Christian names in this generation, would God have to skip over your life because he found no faith, and he had to skip to another generation because you didn't have faith during your journey? Hence the subject of my lesson today is the case of a missing verse. I'm not going to preach verse 29, and I'm not going to preach verse 30. I'm going to preach what's in between. Y'all okay? It is a tragedy when God sees people he has to skip over because they did not have enough faith to grab their promise. It's not that God's promise isn't present, and it's not that God didn't prepare it. It's just that sometimes we ain't got enough faith to receive it. Are you following what I'm saying? God's people have got to get enough faith to receive what God has, because God cannot bless a faithless people. Are y'all following me? Well, let's preach what's in between the verses. Turn to Numbers 13. Let's preach what's in between the verses. Turn to Numbers 13. It is an interesting phenomenon that as the Hebrew writer was writing, he's going to skip 40 years because that was a time of extreme faithlessness. And God, and it's interesting, watch this. What you're going to understand in just a minute is that God will let the faithless generation die before he gives the blessing. And he'll raise up a whole new generation of faith that deserves it. Not deserves it, but that he wants to give it to. Because God does not want to bless faithless people. And God has a way of letting faithless people die out so that he can move forward with a new generation of faith. Are y'all following what I'm saying? You got to be real careful with God, because God will let you die out. When God can't find faith, watch this. He'll keep the blessing where it is and just give it to somebody else. Y'all are not hearing me. I used to preach, and I still believe to some degree, that when God's got your name on a blessing, can't nobody take it. No, nobody can take it, but God can redistribute it. Y'all are not hearing me. God can redistribute your blessing. In other words, you were supposed to get it. He brought you out of Egyptian bondage for you to be blessed. He's got the blessing waiting on you. But if you can't get to a place where you can trust God through the difficulty and not magnify your situation, God will say, I can't give this blessing to you because you can't meet me on the stage of faith. And if you can't meet me at faith, you can't have this blessing. Y'all in Numbers 13, come in. I'm almost done, I promise. Sort of. Turn to Numbers 13:25. Watch this. Oh, God. Help me, Jesus. Numbers 13, verse 25. Y'all there? All right, I'm not there yet. I'm fooling with these electronics. All right. Numbers 13:25. Numbers 13:25 is between Hebrews 29 and verse 30. Did you hear me? I said Numbers 13 is between Hebrews 29 and verse 30. It is the event that God skipped over. Or it's the reason God will skip over. Are you following that? Now watch this. When they returned from spying out the land, this is when God, Moses dispatched these men to spy out the land. And you remember that 12 spies were dispatched. And they were to evaluate all of the data in regards to the land of Canaan. I want you to write down the word data, because some people get caught up in the data. And if you're not careful, you'll let data kill your faith. Sometimes it's not the information you need to be caught up on. You can get a lot of information, but if you don't filter it through faith, you'll end up being discouraged from something you should receive. All right. Now they go get the data. In other words, go spy out the land. They're to find out, is it really flowing with milk and honey? Who is in the inhabitants of the land? Are the lands fortified? Are there walls in the land? How hard will it be to penetrate the land? They're to go get some data. Now they went and got the data. Now keep this in mind. In verse 30 of Hebrews 11, remember, it says, by faith they circled the walls of Jericho. You remember, these were walled cities. Now watch this. Verse 25. When they returned from spying out the land, at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregations of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. And they brought back a word to them and to all the congregation, showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into a land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey. God was telling the truth. Watch this. And it says, watch this. It flowed with milk and honey. And this is the fruit. They actually brought back a cluster to show this is the fruit of it. It is flowing with milk and honey. Then verse 28 says, nevertheless. You should never follow God's promise with but or nevertheless. If God makes a promise and it is as God said it is, and God says it is flowing with milk and honey and it's prepared for us to take it, you should never say, yes, the land is flowing with milk and honey, but or nevertheless. There is no nevertheless behind God's promise. When God makes a promise, you don't follow it with excuses. Y'all gonna help me a lot. Watch. God's people have a way of making excuses to stay in mediocrity. Sometimes it's not that God has you stagnated, your faith got you stagnated. God is waiting for it to elevate you, but you don't have enough faith to leave where you are. And we have a habit of magnifying either where we've been or where we are, and it hinders where we're trying to go. Are you hearing what I'm saying? There are some people in God's church that will never want to go nowhere because they keep magnifying yesterday. And they keep magnifying where they were. Now watch this. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land, watch no faith. I'm going to tell you, look, I want you to see why they got skipped over. They live in the land, or rather live in the land, are strong. The cities are fortified. Fortified means they're walled. Now remember, when that new generation raise up, they're going to see the same walls that this generation saw. All right, they're fortified, very large, and moreover, we saw that the descendants of Anak are there. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. Watch this, verse 30. Thank God for a Caleb faith. Caleb said, the Bible says, then Caleb quieted the people. Caleb said, be quiet and stop talking. Caleb said, I got something to say. Now, in the midst of all of this faithlessness, Caleb now says, I want to have something to say here, and that is we should be, by all means, go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome. Let me help you, church. You need, when you see obstacles and when the data is discouraging, you need a Caleb kind of faith that will say, no matter what the obstacles are, if God promised the land, and if God said we can have it, then we need to have an overcome it kind of faith. In other words, it's dangerous, and I can't stand when I'm going through my crisis. I can't stand being around folk who don't think I can overcome it. You got to be careful about who you put in your circle, because faithlessness is contagious. And I need folk to know when I'm in the hospital and the doctor shakes his hand, I need somebody to be able to say that God can bring you out of this. When I lose my job and I don't know where my next meal's coming from, I need a Caleb that'll say we can overcome this. I'm tired of folk that always make excuses for not being great. I need some overcoming faith around me. Are you following what I'm saying? There are some people that magnify the obstacle and minimize God. Now God says here's something you can have, but you're so busy looking at the data you forgot about faith. There's an animal called an African impala. Interesting animal, because an impala can jump 10 feet up and cover 30 feet in his leap. But when they put that impala in a zoo or in a reservation, all they have to build is a 3-foot wall. Now you ask, and you should be asking, why would they build a 3-foot wall for an animal that can jump 10 feet high and cover 30 feet in length? An impala can jump high and he can cover 30 feet. But if you put a 3-foot wall in front of him, he won't jump over it because he can't see where he's going to land.
That's all right, preacher. Come on now. Come on now.
So he's not trapped by the wall. He's trapped by what he can't see.
That's all right. That's all right.
There are some folk that God is trying to tell you jump and trust me. But because you got to see where you're going to land, and you're always trying to find out, can you control the situation? Some of us won't jump over stuff we should clear. We should jump high over that wall. Because you have no faith, you said, God, I won't jump because I can't see what you see. We've got folk trapped in the Church of Christ by a 3-foot wall. You're trapped by it's not that you can't clear it. It's not that we can't overcome it. It is the fact that you don't trust God enough to leap over 3-foot walls, and we'll act like a 3-foot wall is a 20-foot wall. Are y'all following what I'm... Church, when God starts showing you you can have it, the only person that will stop you is yourself. Are y'all following what I'm... Come here. I'm almost there. Come here. So what happens, let me summarize most of this. So what happens is Caleb says, we can overcome this. And the people will respond and say, no, we cannot overcome it. Now here's what God is going to do. They looking at Canaan. They are in proximity of their blessing. So much so that they can see it. But they don't have enough faith to jump because they are afraid of the inhabitants in the land. And they have magnified them to the degree that they said they are giants in the land. We can't have it. And the people get depressed because of a faithless report. By the way, faithless people in a congregation are some of the most dangerous members. Because faithless people will get in the parking lot and talk to you about why we shouldn't. Y'all not gonna help me along in here. Y'all don't have parking lot talks down here in Dallas, but back home, our folk meet in parking lots after church. They don't bring it up to the preacher, they don't bring it up to the elders, but they'll get in little pockets and circles and start talking about why they don't like what was said, and we don't need to be fooling with that. And that's gonna take too much. We got too many folk that gotta take too much kind of lack of faith, and rather than being able to say we can overcome it. And faithless people will get in circles and start saying, now I heard what they said, but you know I don't believe it, don't you? Y'all not gonna help me. I heard what they said, but you know we can't do that. And here it is. God is waiting for you to have enough faith to get what he has for you. Now watch what God does. God, you can read it when you go home. In Numbers 14, 33 and 34, what will happen is God is going to say, well, for 40 days that you didn't have faith, I'm going to make you wander for 40 years. What? Come here. Come here. They will be in proximity of the blessing. And God will make a march around it. For 40 years, they will march around something they should have got 40 years ago. But the reason God will make a march around it is because the wilderness is designed to kill faithless people. And God will often wait until faithless people die out before he starts giving the blessing to a generation that got faith. And faithless people sometimes can hold you back. Here it is, you got a Caleb faith, but you associated with faithless people. And sometimes being associated with faithless people can hold you back. And God has to create a wilderness for you to let go of folk that need to die. Are you following what I'm saying? 40 years. They'll march around a blessing that they should have had, because they did not have enough faith to say, let's go get it. And out of the 12 spies, only 2 of them will go into the land of Canaan. Come here. Caleb has to march for 40 years because of 10 jokers that didn't have faith. Caleb believed. Joshua believed. But they've got to march 40 years. Because of some jokers that said, we can't get it. Are y'all not hearing me? So here they are marching for 40 years. What are you doing, God, in this wilderness? I got to kill some folk off. Now I got to be transparent. I'm going to tell you a little bit about West End's history. Show you what sometimes lack of faith can do. And maybe you can learn from our example. I want you to learn from our lack of faith. So I'm going to tell you how we didn't believe and what God did. There was a time in our history where 40 acres of land came available in Atlanta. 40 acres. Watch this. For about $600,000. But the church and the leaders couldn't agree to take the land because they struggled between moving and wanting to be comfortable where they were. Come here, I hope it helps you. While they fussed and fought, they eventually realized they couldn't go because enough people didn't agree to go. And the whole project stopped. Watch this. I then come to the church. We then grow leaps and bounds and find out again we need to move. Now 16 acres come available for the same price as the 40 they didn't get. Y'all not, 40 acres. we now have to pay a little bit more for the 16 because we didn't grab the 40 when God gave it to us. Because we didn't have enough faith to get the 40, now years later, we're paying more for less. Come here. I decided, a Baptist church invited me to come say a word to them and have our group sing. Didn't know where they were, didn't know where they were located, but they said, would you come over? I said, yes. Brought my group. When I walked up on the property, one of my elders started crying. And I said, what are you crying for? He said, this was the place. And it was now called Mount Zion. It had a parking garage on it. It was a monstrosity. And we had to walk into a place that we didn't have enough faith to get, and it was redistributed. Did you just hear what I told you? When God starts putting stuff in front of you, if you don't have enough faith to get what God has, somebody else will occupy. Now, I know what somebody's saying, well, that's a Baptist church. Well, all right. Jesus said about a centurion soldier that was not part of the covenant of Israel. He said about the centurion soldier, I have found more faith in this centurion than I found in all of Israel. Isn't it a shame that sometimes the very folk we claim are not saved got more faith to get what we should have, and we got the nerve to try to send them to hell? We want to talk about who's going to hell, but we ain't going to hell for no faith. You're going to have to understand that it's important for us. Yeah, it's all this. Yeah, all this technology. Y'all trying to mess with me. They had enough faith to get what we didn't have enough faith to get. Now we are paying more for something that would have been less. Do you hear what I'm saying? Church, watch this. I'm done. Go back to Hebrews 11. Last point. Go back to Hebrews 11. Trying to summarize this. I'm trying to help you because you got an opportunity in front of you, but I'm telling you, you don't want to be faithless. Because God's about to do something great with Mountainview, and the last thing you need to be worried about is anybody else. That's why it's time out for worrying about the brotherhood. Worry about Mountainview. Worry about your faith. Worry about what God is doing here. There's time out for having multiple memberships all over the city. You got to make sure that you're loyal to the congregation you go to and be an asset to the congregation, not a liability. It's time for you to be committed. It's time for you to be loyal, because God is trying to take you to the next level, to the next place, and God wants to see faith before he redistributes. God doesn't want to give it to nobody else. It's got Mountainview written all over it. Now what you got to do is go and get what. Go get it. Go get it. Go snatch it. Go get it. It's yours. It's your blessing. Go get it. Don't you be discouraged. Don't you worry about nobody saying about you. You better go get yours, because I'm going to go get mine. Go get it. Worry about who talking about you. Let them talk. Let them write letters. Let them talk around you while God prepares a table right in the midst. All right. Go get it, church. I'm close enough for you now to have real talk. You have to be. Congregation can't move forward unless it has congregational loyalty. You can't be double-minded on this stuff. Everybody got to buy in. Praise Jesus. Now go. You at Hebrews 11? Look at verse 30. I'm done. The 40 years in between. Y'all saw that? All right. You have 40 years in between. And now another generation is going to occupy Jericho because the first generation didn't have enough faith to get it. Y'all got that? All right. So he says, and I'll summarize it. Now when Joshua 6 is written, Joshua 6 is about a generation that didn't come out of Egypt. It's a whole different generation that God raised up to have faith. Now watch how much faith this group got. God says in Joshua 6:1, I have given you the land. I like that verse. Before they got it, God said, I gave it to you. Before they get it, God says, I've given it to you. Now, when God says, I've given it to you, God tells them what to do. And Israel does what Joshua explains. Are y'all following that? Now watch this. When they go to march around the wall, watch this. This ain't no good military strategy. God said, them walls are going to fall, but they're going to fall by faith. What I want you to do is walk around the wall one time every day. After you walk around the wall, go to sleep. What kind of strategy? Jericho got a wall around it. It looked like we're going to have to do more. No. March one time around the wall, go to sleep. Well, why can't I go to sleep? Because I told you I've already given it to you. So every day they're going to march. On the last day they'll march 7 times. Now watch this. They're carrying a horn that's called a ram's horn. Now Israel has several horns in their history. Some of them, the silver ones, were often used to call to battle. God doesn't tell them to bring the war horns. He said bring the ram's horn, which were horns that were always used for celebration. You ain't got to fight for this thing. I didn't invite you to Jericho to fight this. I'm going to fight it for you. But what I want you to do is carry a ram's horn, and I want you to blow it and start celebrating even before the walls start falling. We got too many folk that are waiting to praise God after you get it. But when you know God is good on his word, I ain't got to wait for God to do what he said he's going to do. I can blow my ram's horn right now and start celebrating because I know God is going to do what he's saying. Are y'all following that? Faith is necessary because God can't bless faithless people. Well, Heyward, you don't understand. I'm going through too much trouble in my life. I know I got to have faith. But what's the struggle for? Why can't God just give me what I want? Why can't God just give me what I need? Why I got to march around the wall? Because God can't let you have blessings he don't put a wall around. Let me help you understand. Marching around the wall didn't make the wall fall. Marching around the wall made them trust God. God didn't need them to march for the wall to fall. The reason God's got to put you through a process is because it's in the process that I learned faith. It's in the marching that I learned patience. It's in the marching that I learned how to wait on God. God could have just said walls fall and they would have failed. But God said, I want you to march because in your marching, it will be a demonstration of how much you trust me in spite of the fact that what I'm asking you to do don't make no sense. Marching around the wall don't make no sense. But it's their way of showing God that we trust you in spite of what you're telling us. We trust your word even though it doesn't fit our intellect. March around the wall. Some people want blessings that ain't been walled first. In other words, I want to walk right in on it. God says no, because if I let you walk in on a blessing that you can get yourself, then you won't give me the glory for what you receive. I've got to fix it where by your own strength and your own might, you can't get this blessing unless I make them walls fall. Are y'all following that? So faith is designed to build your patience, is designed to build your trust in God. Now, some people don't want struggle, but that's why you are hindered. It's because you want blessings with no struggle. Blessings with no process. Listen to me, church. A young boy found a caterpillar, and he put the caterpillar in a jar. And he said, Mommy, I caught a caterpillar. She said, well, let's watch it turn into a butterfly. put it on the dresser, and they watched that caterpillar. Eventually, there was a cocoon around that caterpillar. Weeks went by, time has elapsed, and suddenly the cocoon starts to break. But the boy saw that the caterpillar had a wing, but it was struggling to get out of the cocoon. The boy watched it struggle for a few days. And the boy said, Mama, it looks like we need to help the caterpillar because he wants to break free. There's a break in the cocoon, but he can't get out. I can even see part of his wing, but the cocoon won't give way. So the boy thought, let me help the caterpillar. He went and got some scissors, went to the jar, opened the jar, and cut the cocoon. The caterpillar fell out. And when the caterpillar fell out, it had wings, but it couldn't fly. So the caterpillar is now crawling with wings. So the boy wants to know, why is the caterpillar crawling and it's got wings? I helped them get out the cocoon, so they went and asked his science teacher. Science teacher said, what happened? They said, look, the butterfly won't fly. You know, I cut him out the cocoon. And the scientist said, the teacher said, wait. You cut him out? He said, oh man, listen, young fella, the reason that the caterpillar must be left alone is because it must go through the struggle. Because it's the wings that break the cocoon. But if you don't let it go through the struggle of pushing against the pressure, then what happens is you prevent the caterpillar from developing strength in his wings. Because the more he struggles, the stronger the wings get. It's through the struggle that he learns how to fly. It's through the breaking out of the cocoon that he gains the power to take flight. It's through that struggle that you help him. But now because you cut him out, he does not have the benefit of the struggle. And for the rest of the caterpillar's life, he will crawl when he should be flying. He will crawl when he has wings because you bust him out of something that he needed to struggle through. I've come today to tell you, you better thank God for your struggle, because it's through pushing, through the pressure, it's through going through the process that my wings get stronger. I can fly now because of what I went through. Some folk don't want to go through the struggle, but at the expense that you'll never take flight. And right now you need to ask yourself a question. Am I crawling when I should be flying? Because I wanted to skip the struggle. And now I got wings, but I'm forced to crawl. There's a lot of folk in the church and a lot of churches that keep crawling because they're afraid of the struggle that requires faith. Mountainview, you've gone through some struggles. Now it's time to take flight. Your struggle was designed to strengthen your wings. And the higher you fly is indicative of what you went through in your cocoon. Now, let me tell you, while I'm dealing with that flying illustration, sometimes an eagle, or eagles period, don't fly in packs. And an eagle has to be willing to fly by itself. Don't wait for nobody to endorse what you do. Because sometimes an eagle's got to fly by himself. And not only that, if you fly too low. See, chickens gonna cluck. Chickens are gonna cluck. But you ought to be flying too high to hear it. An eagle can't hear a chicken cluck because he flies way too high to listen to it. The church is full of cluckers. But Mountainview, you need to fly so high that you can't hear the chickens when they start clucking. Fly so high that you can't hear the whispers in our brotherhood. Fly so high that you take the territory God has for you. Fly so high that you can hear the whispers of people that try to complain about your success. And if you're here today, if you're here right now in your personal life, if you're here right now in your life, some of you had to go through a cocoon. In other words, some of you have gone through some struggles, but let me tell you, you can fly higher than you've ever flown because of what God has put you through. And don't despise the discipline of the Lord, because it's designed to help you. Now, I praise Jesus. If someone's here and you're not part of the body of Christ, the Bible says by faith the walls fell after they were compassed 7 times. You are not saved at faith, you're saved by faith. And there's a difference between being saved at the point of faith and being saved through the process of faith. Their faith was coupled with a faith that worked, a faith that was manifested in obedience. You can be saved right now by faith, but it will be after you have confessed Jesus Christ as Lord.